Welcome to the Savvy Surgical Technologist. I'm your host, John Budd. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. I'm happy and excited to have you guys back for my season finale, State Property. Um, I want to first take a opportunity to thank everybody that came on, the co-host with me during season one, Shantae, Kimberly, Karen, Tanya. Thank you guys for coming on to give us all the insight on your lives and your particular spaces inside of healthcare and some of the things that motivate you and drive you outside of healthcare. All of those things are important because the stories are important. I always tell you guys that the stories are important, that the links of our lives, they matter, and that if we check the links of our lives, we'll see why we are exactly where we are today because our decision making matters, and going forward in this podcast, I'm going to take you guys back down memory lane with me. I'm going to share some things with you about my life inside the penitentiary and how it's eventually what shaped me into who I am today. And I always emphasize that the stories matter. To you guys, they're stories, but to me, they're traumatic events and traumatic things that went on inside my life when I was younger. But all of those things, they matter. And, one thing I want to share with you guys before I get started is that there are no defining moments. All the moments matter. So if you made a momentarily mistake that led you to a bad situations, know that you have an opportunity every day to change the course of your life by your decision making. If you make better decisions, it'll lead to better outcomes and your life will get better. I feel like I'm living proof of that. And it took me a long time to get here. I had to go through a lot to get to who I am today, but I appreciate it. I appreciate it today. I embrace the journey. I no longer resent the journey because the things that happened to me and the things that happened to me in the course of my life has set me up and put me in position to do great things, to be an impactful person. And I'm motivated to do that. I'm motivated to outlive the mistakes. You know what I'm saying? So as I take you guys back down memory lane, you're going to see some things, you're going to hear some things and stuff, that probably will resonate with you. And I hope that it impacts you in a positive way and sends you forward into a life that's better because I firmly believe that the decisions that we make, they matter. And one thing I want to emphasize to you guys that through the course of this season, I've never edited any episode. The episodes are all authentic. So if I make mistakes, if I stumble with words or whatever, know that that's authentic. I'm not taking it out because I'm not a media guy. I'm not somebody who's trying to impress with eloquent speech or anything like that. I just want to get my message across that we have opportunities to have a great life if we make better decisions. Going forward, I was trying to figure out how I wanted to present this session, and I'm just going to treat it like a question and answer session. Over the years, I've always received questions from people on what happened and why did I go to prison. And I didn't talk about those things a lot in detail, but every now and then it would come out that I was in prison. In fact, when I was at Nemours Children's, I found out that somebody Googled me or whatever and found out that I was in prison, and he went and told everybody that I was an inmate, that I was a convict and stuff like that. And it didn't bother me at the time. Maybe a little bit because it's kind of invasive, but everything I guess is online. I'm just curious as to why he would think to go look me up through that, because it wasn't something that was common knowledge or whatever. So I don't know what motivated him to do that. But anyway, now it's common knowledge. I'm sharing it with you guys. So I decided to treat it like a question and answer session. Again, I want to tell you guys that the links of your lives, they matter. That if you check the links, if you follow the links of your life, you'll find out why you are exactly where you are today. And if you want a better situation, if you want a better life, you have to put stronger links onto your chain. Okay? So, I'm going to take you guys back to, first I'm going to start through the county. And first, I'm going to go further back because the question is, the most important question is what happened? That's what most people want to know is what happened, what led to me being incarcerated. So, and there's really no defining moment. Like I said, there are multiple moments. There are no defining moments, but there's things that lead up to stuff that we do, right? So, I was young. And I know that I was on the road to incarceration years before I was actually incarcerated because of the decisions that I made. So I was always a good kid. I was one of those kids who read a lot. I wanted to be a priest at one time. I wanted to be a fireman. I wanted to be aspired to be great things in terms of like giving back to the community as a young child. I remember reading the Bible, I used to read tons of books and stuff like that. And I loved that life for myself. I was a happy kid. I was comical. I was always making jokes and playing with my mom and my siblings and stuff like that. But in the course of my life, as I got a little bit older, I made decisions that would shape the course of my life. And I remember it, and I told a friend of mine this recently, that my life changed when I decided that I wanted to be cool more than I wanted to be kind. That one decision would lead me into incarceration. Because what happened is, we had just moved up to Mount Airy. It's a nice neighborhood up in Philly. It's called Uptown now, but we had just moved up there. And I was walking down the street with a friend of mine, and I had got sucker punched by some guy. He had mistaken me for my brother. So he sucker punched me, and I didn't do anything. I didn't defend myself. I didn't fight back or whatever. Instead, I went home and I told my brother about it. And me and my brother and my friends, we went searching for the guy, and we eventually found him. And him and my brother got in a fight. My brother basically fought this guy for me. It was a good fight. My brother won. I feel like my brother won the fight. But at the end of the fight, he fell. He slipped and fell, and the guy ended up on top of him. And again, I didn't do anything to help him. So as we were walking home, I made a decision that I would never be coward like that again in my life. And that set me loose. From that point on, I was a terror. I told you guys in episode 1 that I was in multiple fights, multiple times a week. I was driven to outlast that moment where I didn't help my brother. And those decisions would ultimately lead me to being locked up. Because I had lost myself. I had lost my true self. I didn't want to be a smart kid. I wanted to be a cool kid. I wanted to be known. That's what they called it in Philly back then. I want to be known. I want everybody to know me. And like I said, those decisions, they led me into what I am, to me being incarcerated. So let's fast forward a little bit. You know, what eventually happened to lead me to getting locked up in Virginia was I had a good job. My dad, George, had got me a job at a bakery. I had just graduated high school, you know, and I was planning on going in the Marines or whatever, because we were always raised to either go to college or go into the service. So after I graduated from high school, I had started working in this bakery. I had to be there at 5:30 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. It was a good job for somebody of my age. I was young. It was paying me a lot, but that wasn't enough for me. I was already in the streets. I was already hustling a little bit, hiding behind my mom back, selling things and doing things, because I always tell you guys that I'm an earner. But back then, I was a hustler because I wasn't earning things in the right way, besides my job that I had, but I was also in the streets hustling, hiding behind my mom back, doing dishonorable things that we weren't raised to do. But the job wasn't enough for me, because again, I wanted to be known. I wanted to be more than what I was. So I had an opportunity. My cousin called me in Virginia. He was telling me how he was getting money down there. And I'm not going to mention my cousin's name, but shout out to my cousin. He's a part of this story or whatever. But people who know. But anyway, he called me and told me how much he was getting money down in Virginia. And I was like, man, I'm going to come down there and I'm going to join you, and we're going to get this money together. Because again, I always tell you guys that I'm an earner. I make money to this day, to this moment. I make money, and I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of it more so today because I do it the right way. I don't shit on nobody. I do things an honorable way. If it's not legit, then I'm not doing it. But anyway, I would never forget it, because I remember sitting down in my basement and thinking about when I was about to go down to Virginia, you know, and I was thinking like, damn, I got this job. I really don't need to do this. And that's the funny thing about life. We have options. And if we really take the time and think about what we're about to do, we should choose the better option. But I was younger, and again, I was caught up in the streets. I was always fighting. I was always hustling. I was always doing things, again, that was contrary to my spirit. But at the time, I didn't know that, and I'm always going to emphasize to you guys that when we are in the moment, we don't really know who we are, especially when we're younger. So we make that bad decisions that we think is going to lead to great outcomes. They usually don't. So I was thinking that, damn, I don't really need to do this. I got a good job. I'm about to go into the Marines later on, all of these things. But I got on the bus. I think I got a bus, and forgive me for not remembering all the smaller details, because trauma will remove details from your life. Trauma will remove details. So like time frames and all that, sometimes I get confused on the time frames of what went on and when it went on back then. But I think I got on the bus, and I got to Virginia, and my cousin greeted me, and he met me, and we went down into the projects of where he was getting this money at. I think he was dating a particular girl, whatever, and he was doing really well. And I'll never forget this because it was just so stupid. It was so stupid, and it really set me up and put me on a path of destruction. So we were in the projects, and we had the narcotics and stuff like that. So I got sentenced to 10 to 40 years for possession of cocaine and the distribution of cocaine. Level 1 narcotic. So anyway, I was in the we are out in the breezeways where people were selling their drugs to the customers, and they were coming through. And I never forget, the guy came through, and I tapped my cousin, and I was like, "Yo, you know him?" And my cousin shook his head. He didn't give me a definite no, but he shook his head. He didn't tell me to go sell it to the guy. And, I know, looking back on all of this, I know that it was my arrogance from being from Philly. I thought they were slow in Virginia. I thought that they weren't as wise or as hip or as cool as us. All major mistakes. He didn't tell me not to sell to the guy, but he didn't tell me to sell to the guy. But I ran over and I sold to the guy anyway. I sold the guy. And I seen him walk away. So it was all these bushes around. We were like in the middle of an atrium, like outside, like the breezeways. And it was all these plants and stuff like that outside of those buildings where people could dip in and dip out. You couldn't see them because it was big trees and plants and all that type of stuff. So as the guy was walking away, I turned around to my cousin, and something told me to turn around. Because I had a funny feeling. I turned around, and boom, 30 cops swarmed on me. At least 30. They got me, my cousin. They came out of nowhere. So I remember they handcuffed me, and they threw me and my cousin in the back seat of the car or whatever. And I remember telling him not to say anything. Don't talk to them. Don't say nothing. Just keep your mouth shut. Just be quiet. So ultimately, we got to the police the department and all that. I got booked. I got charged with the possession and distribution or whatever. I think my cousin got charged with the same things, but ultimately, me and my cousin paths diverted. And I'm grateful for his story and what happened to him. He didn't. I think he eventually went to college, and he's doing great things now, but our stories are similar because he struggled through the dark for a long time too. It's not my story to tell about him, but, claps and applaud to my cousin. I love him very much. And I'm happy for where his life ended up. And I'm also grateful for where my life turned out, but I had to go through a lot. I don't know that he went through similar things. He went through a lot of dark times too, as well. But shout out to my cousin, and a lot of love to him. But that night, I told him, don't say anything to the police. We're going to just be quiet. So he eventually got bailed out and went home. I didn't get bailed out right away because my mother, they were in a position. They had 5 kids. They had other kids. They were in a position to get me out at a willy-nilly because of a bad decision that I made. So I ultimately stayed in there a little longer. Fast forward to, the trial I told you guys in episode 1. I think it was episode 1 or episode 2 or 3, whatever episode it was. I told you guys about how I eventually got sentenced to 10 to 40 years, and how when I got back into the cage, how I got emotional and I was crying, and I had called my grandmother to tell her that I had got sentenced to 10 to 40 years. So, and I I told you guys just recently that there is no one thing that led to me getting locked up. It all started when I decided that I wanted to be more than what I really was. You know, if you're a good person and you're a kind-hearted person and you're a person that's ambitious, be kind-hearted, be who you are. Be true to yourself. Don't be contrary to your spirit, because it will lead you into darkness. My life has been full of darkness because of those decisions, but I'm grateful. I'm grateful because a lot of the things that happened has led me to who I am. It led me to finding who I am. And through the course of all the things that I'm going to tell you, I knew that I had the light. I just had to struggle with a lot of things to get to it. But there were moments where I was always sharing it, you know, and giving to others. I've always been a kind-hearted person, and I've always been generous, even when I was inside the dark, even when I was in the penitentiary. So, you know, I told you guys in episode 1 how county life was, how bad it was. I hated the county because it was so cold. And I always, you know, and to this day, I hate the cold. I hate air conditioning. And everything was concrete. So people always ask me, you know, what stands out? Like one of the questions that said, what stands out in your mind most about the time you spent in prison, and why has that moment stayed with you so long? You know, and what stands out to me is I remember the noise. The cold, the concrete, the steel, the heavy doors, and the noise. And one other thing that really stands out to me is how when they transported me, they would have me wrapped up from head to toe in chains, hands in front, ankles chained up, and a chain wrapped around your waist, and you couldn't walk. You shuffled. And what stands out to me the most about that is how you would shuffle on the concrete, and you could hear the chains slapping the concrete. To this day, if I hear chains, I'll jump, or if I hear a gate close, I'll jump. That's called trauma response. So, you know, back then when I was living those things, I didn't know that I was traumatized. I didn't know that I was beat up and hurt. I didn't know that I was destroying my life. I just knew that I had to survive. So I would walk and I would shuffle, and I still, and it would slap on the concrete, or I would hear, you know, what I hated the most, especially in county, was those heavy doors slamming, because they would slam the doors. You could hear the keys going. They had these big keys that they would slam it into the lock, and they would turn and twist it, and you could hear the noise of that. And that noise always bothered me, you know. And then also, you know, there was always inmate games. I call them inmate games, where they would try you and they would play you. You know, I remember one time that I was in county, and I had got a lawyer's visit. And I told you guys in episode 1 how much I hated the food. I never ate the food. When I first got to county, I couldn't eat the food at all. It took me a long time to start eating the food. And eventually I would start eating it. I hated breakfast more than I hated anything. It was just garbage. It was just poison. But anyway, I remember I got an early morning lawyer visit. It was like right before breakfast. And they came and got me, and I went to my lawyer. And when I got back, someone had eaten my breakfast. And I knew that they were trying me. And, you know, and I always tell you guys that at that point in my life, I could rumble. I was rumbling everybody. It didn't matter. I was little. I was real small. Like, I'm still small today, but I was even smaller back then. But a lot of people who know me know that I was fearless. I didn't care if I won the fight or lost the fight. I just wanted motherfuckers to respect me. Excuse the language, but this wants to be authentic. I wanted people to respect me and to know that I wasn't somebody to fuck around with. So I got back into the block, and I realized that my breakfast was done. I hated the breakfast. If the Joker would have asked me for the breakfast, I'd have gave him the breakfast. So I got back, and I said, who ate my breakfast? And, you know, they kind of laughed. It was like 10 other guys in there. I forget how many. It was 2 to a block. It was like 5 in the dorm. So it must have been about 10 of us. And sometimes I would be in there by myself, in my cell by myself. But anyway, this particular time, I asked who ate my breakfast, and they start laughing. And a lot of these guys, they were from Virginia and D.C., and I was from Philly. So it was a difference of neighborhoods. Like, it was people who had their cliques. I was alone for the most part. So they laughed, and I kind of had a feeling who did it. So I said to the guy, I said to the block, and this is a true story. I said, I don't know which one of you motherfuckers ate my breakfast, but I'm going to pick one of you to fuck up so you guys can know that I'm not somebody to fuck around with. And as soon as I said that, I sucker punched the guy that I thought did it. I know he did it. I beat him black and blue. This is a true story. The COs came charging to the dorm, breaking us up or whatever. And it's funny because I thought they was going to send me to the hole or whatever. They didn't send me to the hole. They took him. Throughout my life, man, I think some things happen for me that it always ends up going my way because it's something about me. And I don't want to say that in an arrogant way because it's not arrogant. It's just something about me that certain people see. So they took him out and didn't take me, even though I basically initiated because they knew that I wasn't a troublemaker. And that happened. One other incident, and I may tell you about it later on in this podcast that happened upstate because I'm going to take you guys upstate with me too. But in the county, they took him, but they didn't take me. So I end up staying in the dorm, and they took him out, and I never seen that guy again or whatever. But the message was sent. Do not mess with me. I'm not somebody to mess with. So through the course of my time there, after that incident, people would ask me for my breakfast. And I would always just give them the breakfast because I didn't like the food. So I basically only ate dinner and a little pieces of lunch or whatever. And I told you guys also how kind-hearted I was and some of the things and how I treated people. And I never treated people bad, but I defended myself and I protected myself. And the message was clear. Do not mess with John Bud. They didn't call me John Bud back then. They called me Gucci because I had Gucci glasses. Thank God for those glasses. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for sending me those glasses because I couldn't see back then. I had got hit in my head a few years before that. I was in a fight in Philly and I was beating this guy. I was winning the fight and the guy jumped up and hit me in my head with a bat and split my whole thing open. And I was already had bad vision, but my vision went really bad after that. But anyway, I always was try to be kind-hearted to people, and I told you guys in episode 2 or 3, again, I'm sorry for not remembering the time frames of the episodes or whatever, but I remember telling you guys how, I had a cellie right before I went upstate who used to cry. He used to always listen to me read and stuff like that. And I'll tell you some more stuff about reading and how I impacted lives in upstate just from reading. But I would read and at night, after lights out, we would go to sleep. And every night I would hear him crying. And he was trying to hide and muffle the crying. This guy was big and you would never think that that's what it was about. So he would be crying and, right before I left, he asked me, did I hear him? And I never forget it because it was a moment of truth for me as well. I told him, yeah, I did hear him and stuff like that. And he was curious. He looked stunned because he was like, how come you never clown me? Because back then, that's the bid. They call it the bid. Like you pick on people, you laugh and joke with people, you make jokes, you crack jokes on people. They call it bidding because when you're in jail, it's called a bid. You're doing time. So we was like, we're bidding on each other to pass the time, to make the time go fast. So he asked me why I didn't bid on him, why I didn't crack jokes on him, and why I didn't humiliate him in front of the rest of the inmates. And I told him that it was because I was crying too. No one can understand the pain of incarceration, the loneliness, the mental anguish. It feel like time never goes by. It does, of course, but it feel like every moment is an hour. And like I said, I was always cold. I was always alone. I didn't get a lot of visits because I was far from home. And when I would call home, I could, I didn't talk to a lot of my friends because they were young. They was running the streets and stuff. They was doing their thing, I would talk to my mother and I would see how hurt she was and, and the things that I put her through, I knew that I hurt her. So when I would talk to her on the phone, it would hurt me. And I remember hanging up the phone and always being sad, like talking on the phone. So I would over the course of my time through the county and state, I stopped using the phone because it hurt too much. But I remember telling him that I was crying too. And, he had a look on his face because, I think I had this image that I was so much tougher or beyond the mental anguishes and beyond the things that I seen in there, the horrors that we seen and the things that, the nastiness of other human beings, so eventually, they moved me upstate. So, back to the question, that's what resonated with me the most, the mental anguish of being incarcerated, the physical things of being chained up like an animal, and one thing I didn't tell you guys is like how you know, and I'll tell you this now, because when I was transferred, I finally left county, thank God. And I never knew, I didn't have any experience from either side, county or state. But people would tell me that upstate was so much better, and that I shouldn't, I would be happier when I got upstate. So they came and got me in the middle of the night, and they transferred me to a place in, I guess it was Northern or Central Virginia. And again, I apologize for not remembering all the details of where I was at, even the name of the camps and prisons that I was in. I forget, but anyway, they transferred me upstate. And when you first get upstate, and it happened in the county too, but when you first get upstate, they'll take you into this room and they make you get naked. They strip you down. You don't get into a shower. I guess some places nowadays they may have showers, but back then they hosed you down like an animal. So you had to stand on the wall and they would blast you with water, a hose of water, strong. And then they would tell you to bend over and you had to spread open. I'm sorry for the graphic details, but these things are the things that happen, and these are the things that set the course of my stay there. They would ask you to bend over and they would watch you, and then they would throw powder on you. I guess it was for the lice or whatever, because some people came in dirty and with lice and all types of creatures all over them, like worms and stuff. There's so many nasty things that you would see. But anyway, that's what they would do. And then they would take you to this place where it would have blankets, sheets, towels, your suits, like shirts and jackets, and they gave you shoes. These shoes, they were like Timberlands, but they were like like Chucker Timberlands. They were nice, actually. But it was so much better than county, because county clothes, you had like a jumpsuit and it was always cold and you had to put your arms in your suit or in your shirt or whatever. But upstate was better. They gave you like a jacket. I had a jacket. It was like a jean jacket outfit or whatever. But I remember you have it in your hand and then you walk through the dorms. So all the inmates would see the new people coming in. And they would be lined up, and you would walk down the block, and they would watch you. And I remember my first day upstate. I had my stuff, and they was taking me to my dorm. I was in dorm A, and they was taking me to my bunk. I had the top bunk because I was a new jack. New jacks don't get the bottom bunk. You get the top bunk, and you be happy with it. So I remember walking down the block, and this guy came up to me. True story. Big muscle guy, white guy. He had all these jailhouse tattoos on, and he was big. He had blonde hair, and he was muscular or whatever. And he had these cookies. He had cookies. I think it was Chippeways or some kind of knockoff version of the cookies. And he said, "Yo, you want some cookies?" And I said, "What? I don't want no fucking cookies. What's wrong with you?" Because, and I don't know how I knew this stuff. I think my uncle Gregory had told me, don't accept anything. Because again, I was young, right? But he basically said, don't accept anything from anybody in prison, because you'll end up being their bitch. And again, excuse me for the language, but I want to be authentic. And you'll end up being their bitch. And I think I must have remembered. I was like, man, I don't want no fucking cookies. And of course, I learned stuff through the county or whatever. And he was like, all right, cool. And he left me alone. It was no drama or whatever, but it was just like weird. So I remember picking my stuff up or whatever. And through the course of my time there, it was certain things that happened. That was rough. Like I seen some things, man. And in my first stop, I was in, like I said, I think I was in Northern or early Central Virginia. And there was a lot of cats from DC, a lot of guys from Virginia, and they didn't like each other. I was from Philly. So they was always trying to recruit me to be on their clique, to be in their gang. It wasn't literally a gang. It was a bunch of young people my age that got caught up in some foolishness. I don't even think it was a lot of violent criminals in that joint. It was just a lot of hustlers that wasn't true hustlers that got caught up. We all got caught up or whatever. But it was battles. It was fights and stuff in there. And it was certain things. But it wasn't to the level that a lot of people would think. And that's where I had started my store box. I told you guys in another previous episode that I had started a store box because I always been an earner. I was a hustler. My mother couldn't send me a lot of money and stuff like that. So I said, send me a check. I'm going to put it on my books, and then I'm going to start a store box. And that's what I did. So I got a couple packs of cigarettes, oodles of noodles, ramen noodles, and all these type of things. Tuna fish was real popular. Cigarettes was real popular. And I would sell them 2 for $1. 3 for $1 when it was close to the end of the month, when people were skitzing and they really wanted the things. But the funny thing is, during during that time, I didn't make a lot of money because I would give a lot of stuff away. Because again, I always tell you guys that stuff don't define you. The mistakes don't define you. How you react and how you treat people, no matter what you do, no matter what part of your life, it matters. I was always good to people. And through the course of my life, I used to think that I was such a bad person because I was locked up before, that I struggled with alcohol and partying, and I had struggled with addictions and mental health through the course of my life. And in future podcasts, I'll tell you about the times after the penitentiary and the struggles that I had just making it through normal life, and whether I was working inside healthcare or not. But through the course of all of the things that I've been through, I always was a kind-hearted person. I just didn't know that, or I couldn't accept it. You know what I mean? I wanted to be, again, cool. I didn't want to be kind. And I'm grateful today that I accept who I am, and that I embrace who I am, and I'm so happy to be a kind-hearted person, a no-nonsense person. I don't take no shit, but I don't give shit anymore. So during the course of me selling, things through the store box, I made a lot of friendships and stuff because a lot of people were struggling. There was just so much poverty there. People couldn't read. People couldn't write. People were brokenhearted. And I always tell you guys that they weren't there to rehabilitate us. They was there to break us. God, the mental stuff, man. Watching the animalistic stuff that other inmates did. I remember this guy, he had came in, and I think he was a pedophile. I think he was charged with molesting a kid. And I remember hearing him screaming one night. And I knew it was him because I knew that when he got there, the rumors was that he was a child molester or whatever. And I don't know. I never really met the guy. He wasn't there that long because they beat the death out of him. I don't know if he died, but the COs, I heard a rumor that they found him in a trash can. In the morning, they found him dumped in a trash can. So when you hear stories about what happens to pedophiles and child molesters in prison, it's true. It's true. So the fact that they didn't pit, back then, I don't know that they pit people in PC. They call it protective custody. We called it Punk City. Punk City, that's where the punks went that was scared to make it in population. But in the morning, they found him dumped inside a trash can. I heard him screaming at the night before. I didn't see it. I don't know what happened. I just know it happened. That messed with my head. But again, through the course of my stay, I was always trying to be good to people. I had a lot of friends there. And I had family, somebody asked me, one of the questions that's always asked was I scared? I was always scared. No, that's wrong. I was scared until I didn't have to be scared anymore. Meaning that when I first got to the place, and remember, I've been transferred multiple times, and I'll tell you about that too. In my first place, I had family got comfortable. My first prison that I was in upstate, I had family got comfortable. I had friends. I had the store box. I didn't have to ask my mother for much. I was just making moves, I was popular. I'm always popular. Wherever I go in my life, I end up being popular. And a lot of times I don't even know how, and now that I know who I am a little bit, I know that a lot of people see my light and they see things in me that I didn't used to see in myself. But anyway, I was comfortable there. I was happy there. And like I said, I had friends, and I would get my haircuts. I remember because one of the guys from Virginia and one of the guys from DC, and they was like muscular guys. All of us was young, and we was just cool. And the time wasn't bad, man. The food was good. The food was better. It was warmer. I had jackets. I had blankets. I could get sweatsuits. I could get clothes sent home from home. So state is definitely way better than county. And I remember I would be getting my hair cut. Sometimes I would alternate because I wanted to be fair, because one guy from Virginia was a barber and a guy from DC was a barber. So I would alternate every month, and I would give them stuff out of my store box, to keep them fed or whatever. And that was their hustle. They was barbers or whatever. And in a lot of ways, I had connected those guys, and I made the rivalries be a lot less. There's something about me. I bring people together, and I'm grateful for that. I'm happy for that. And even when I was on the inside, I did that. But fast forward to, what happened. I'll never forget this because I was asleep. It was the middle of the night. It was in the winter. It was cold, but, again, state was better. It wasn't cold because of the air conditioning. It was just cold, but I was bundled up in my blankets, and I remember somebody hitting my bunk. We had metal bunks. I don't even want to describe to you guys what the mattresses and stuff was like, but I was happy and grateful to have it. Gratitude means something. Always be grateful because it will lead you to better lives. But anyway, the guy, he hit the my bunk. He kept hitting it, and I finally woke up. And he said, "Gucci, wake your ass up." I said, "What?" He said, "Get up." And I'll never forget it because he was like aggressive, like he was mad at me or something. I'm like, "Damn, bro, it's the middle of the night. What I do?" He said, "Wake your ass up and get down, get your clothes on." I said, "Why?" He said, "You being transferred for running an illegal store box." I nearly cried. Of course, back then I always tell you guys I didn't cry. I cried on the inside. But you couldn't physically cry, or I couldn't. But I nearly cried because I knew I had to start over in a new place, and I was scared again. I was scared. I had to leave my friends. The time was going by quick. I figured I was close to home. I don't even remember how much time I had left. Again, I don't know the time frames. I don't even remember what year I was really in jail. If I really think about it, I will, of course. But a lot of stuff like time and time frames, I don't remember them. They traumatized out of me. But I remember getting down and I said, I was begging. I was like, "Why? What's going on?" And I felt like I was begging. And he said, "Shut the fuck up and put your clothes on. You're out of here." I didn't even get a chance to say bye to my friends or anything. And I remember how cold it was because they had me shackled from head to toe, like I told you guys, from the waist, the head, damn near, the arms, hand, and I shuffled. And I remember I couldn't get up. It was a van outside waiting for me. It was so cold. It was in the winter. And I remember trying to step up onto the thing to get into the van, and I couldn't. He had to help me. He had to pull me up by my chains. And I was little, so it wasn't a big deal for him. But he threw me onto the van. There was other people from other penitentiaries in there with me. I ain't know none of them. They didn't transfer nobody from where I was at. And I remember it was like a 2 or 3, 4 hour ride from where I was at to where I was going. And I kept asking, "Where we going? Where we going?" And then we came up over this rise. And I remember looking down. And it was the most beautiful thing. Only place I've seen that's more beautiful is probably in California, the 101 or whatever, and it's parts of Pennsylvania. If you, I traveled for years, and I used to drive through places. And the United States is a beautiful place. If you guys get a chance, get out there and see see the sights just by driving. The 101 in California is one of the most breathtaking things you'll ever see. Places in Pennsylvania. But when I came in this van, we came up over this hill, and I looked down, and I was in the Shenandoah Valley. And it said, "Welcome to the Shenandoah Valley." And it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. But I was still scared because when we came into the prison, it was big and it had all these gates, and you had to go through a gate to get through a gate to go through another gate. And then I had to go through the same process of getting cleaned up and getting new clothes and all that stuff. And I remember walking through the block, and I got there late. It was just right around time for dinner. And I was scared because I had to start over. I don't think people understand the mental anguish, and then I told you that guy earlier. It's not so much the physical fear, it's the mental fear, like what's going to happen to me. And that prison was completely different from the one that got transferred for it, because it was murderers in there, it was rape, it was all type of violence that I was mixed in, and they were older people. Like I wasn't there with the young, like the last one I was in was like a bunch of young people at my age. This one was diverse, and I knew it was different immediately. Because after I got cleaned up and I got my new clothes and they took me to my bunk, I remember because it must have been a Friday because of movie night. Every Friday was movie night. And the things that I seen on movie night is things that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. So I got to my bunk. I put my stuff up and it was time for dinner. I wasn't ready for the things that I was about to see because I always emphasize to you guys that I was young. So I knew about people being gay and stuff like that, but I didn't experience, I didn't really know anything about it. You know, that men slept with men and stuff like that. When I was in the first prison, camp, whatever it was, I didn't know any gay people there. We didn't have any transvestites. I don't want to call them trannies. I don't want to call them by their derogatory names or whatever, but they were transvestites. It was a transvestite in the places, a couple of them, in the new prison that I was in. It wasn't none in my other one. So I didn't know. I wasn't expecting what I was expect to see. What I seen, I didn't expect to see. So when I got there, I picked my stuff up and it was time for dinner. And it was a long line because the place was bigger. There's so many more inmates in there or whatever. And like I said, I was a little afraid and I was a little culture shock or whatever because again, I was new and I'm little. I'm like, I'm gonna have to prove myself again. Like I'm gonna have to fuck somebody up in here or whatever, or they gonna try to get me. Fortunately, a lot of people always wonder if something happened to me on the inside. Nothing ever happened to me. I never got assaulted or raped or anything like that. And besides the guy getting beat up or the child molester, and there was always fights and stuff like that. It was never rapes and things that I knew about. And it happens in other places or whatever, so we all know that. But it never happened to me, and I never knew anybody that it personally happened to. But anyway, there were other things that would tear at your heart. But so we were walking down, and we were in the child line, and I remember that's the first time I seen a guy. And I wish I remember. I think we called him Sabrina. He was big, but he had these tight jeans on, and he looked like a female. He would take Kool-Aid and put it on for his lipstick and stuff like that. And I looked, and I seen him, and I must have had a funny look on my face because I was so surprised because he looked like a female. He had these jeans on where his ass was showing like it was fat, like he looked like a girl. It was so crazy to me because, again, I was young, and I'm like, what is going on? What's she doing here? And then it dawned on me that it was a transvestite. And one of the COs was in line because the COs would be lined up around the cafeteria to keep order or whatever. And one of them was at the door, and he seen the look on my face, and he laughed. And he kind of like winked at me, and he laughed because he seen that it dawned on me what was going on or whatever. And then Sabrina must have seen me, and she winked at me. And I'm like, whatever. Never had an issue with him, her, or whatever. But some of the things that I seen and, with the transvestites and other inmates, because it wasn't just her, it was another one, it was a couple of them, but they didn't look like a female like she did. She was the one that looked like a female. The other ones were more, they dressed like females, like they would tie their shirts up and they did certain things that would let you know that they were, I guess, available or whatever. But I remember, seeing him, and then we ate. And I would see him or her every morning because I would get up extra early. I didn't like to shower with other people. So I would get up extra early, I think right before count. And I would go out, and I think the water was warmer too. And I would go downstairs because you would go down and they had all these showers. And I remember when I first got there, I was worried because I was like, damn, they can get me in the shower. Because, you hear all these rumors about what's going to happen. And, and I had to figure out how I would defend myself because, again, I was small. So there was a concern that I would be raped or molested or whatever. But I knew that I was a rider. I also know how tough I was and that they would have to tear the life out of me to get me that way. And I knew that if they would have got me that way, I would have killed myself because I would have never been able to live with myself. And that's all conjecture for how I thought. Who knows what would have happened if it would have actually happened to me. Maybe I wouldn't have killed myself. And, it's no disrespect to the people that actually were molested and got raped in prison because things happen, you get overpowered. Doesn't make you less of a man. It just makes you a victim. But I remember I would be in the showers early in the morning, and Sabrina would be in there. And Sabrina was nice. Some of the best people I've met in my life have been in prison. So we would shower and we go up, and I would talk to him, and we laugh and joke and whatever. And I would, we would go about our business. I met a lot of great people on the inside. But I always tell you guys that healthcare is a microcosm of what goes on in real life. So is prison. And in this prison, like I said, it was more of an adult prison. So every Friday night they would have game night and movie night and the shit that went on. Everybody was high. It was drugs. So much drugs in there. Heroin, coke. They would mix it. I had this inmate who I was really close with, an older guy named Pee Wee. He was like 6'10", but he was skinny. He was as skinny as a rail, like a pool stick. And he was one of the best people I ever met in my life. He was a singer, and he was on the bottom bunk, and I would be on the top bunk. And if we wasn't at the movie, we would be sitting at the bunk, and it would be bright, the lights. It would be like a festive atmosphere and stuff like that. And Pee Wee would be singing to me. not to me like that, but he would be singing. And I was from Philly, and he loved Blue Magic, and he would always sing Blue Magic. And I really grew to love Pee Wee because he was such a good and influential person to me. He protected me a lot, and I didn't know that until later on. But he protected me a lot because there's just something about me. Like I said, either people like me or either people don't like me when they first meet me. So I was being sized up from what I understand that, you know, they were going to jump me or something like that. But Pee Wee kind of protected me or whatever. It never happened. But you know, through the course of my stay there, Pee Wee would always give me advice. And I had another guy named Bailey. He was an old head. He was actually from Philly, and he taught me a lot. He was a guy, he was waiting to move him to feds because he was making he had got caught up in, back then he used to cut checks. They called it a check cutting scam. I think he made millions of dollars cutting checks, making fake checks or whatever, and they caught him. And he was just transitioning where they was going to take him to the feds or whatever. But he was a mentor to me. He taught me a lot. How to carry myself in prison and how to be, you know, a force in prison or whatever. But anyway, on those nights, those party nights, like I remember one night, I was walking down the block, and again, you know, homosexuality, I didn't really understand what that was. Of course, I knew about the rumors about men being with men, women being with women. Again, I was so naive, I was so young that I'd never seen it. I didn't really believe it happened. And again, I'm not saying that in a detrimental way. As a grown man, you know, as I sit here today, of course things happen, and then, you know, that's their choices and they have a right to those choices or whatever. But I was walking down the block, and there's this guy, his name was Little Willie. He was shorter than me. And he was so funny. I used to always beat him up because I could box, and, you know, they used to know that I could hold my hands because we had boxing rings and all that stuff. So I was pretty sharp down there, and I was known. I was big too. I was built. You know, I had muscular because I was in the gym a lot. So for me to be small, pound for pound, I was really built nicely. But I used to always mess with Little Willie, and I used to always give him a little work, and he'd be like, "No, Gucci, you leave me alone, Gucci," or whatever. But one night, after the Friday night, the movie night, they lock us down, or but it was different because you could walk through the dorms, you could walk through the bathrooms and all that stuff. So I was walking, it was late at night, and I heard this noise, and I looked, and I seen Little Willie in bed with Sabrina, and they were, you know, I tell you guys that story because how it affected me. It like, oh my God, you know, it really hit me hard that I was really in a whole different world. You know, so moving forward, you know, that stuff, I seen that stuff happening, and, you know, over time I accepted it. And then, you know, all the movie nights were really great nights, but it seemed like, looking back, that every time a movie night happened, something bad happened afterwards, or something I would see that would traumatize me. Like Pee Wee would eventually go on to die. You know, I think he overdosed from heroin and coke. And, you know, it's funny because I asked myself, is that a real memory? And, you know, and a lot of times I don't know what's real anymore about what happened back then. But I just know that Pee Wee was gone, and you know, I hate to tell the story if it's not, I don't know. But anyway, there were so many things that went on in there that was just so traumatic. You know, like I said, the fights, the violence, and stuff like that. And then, you know, one of the things that stand out to me, you know, they asked me what was the hardest mental emotional battle that I faced while I was incarcerated, and that was just the time itself and how it crawled on. But one of the things that I hated the most was how I was treated. You know, I had these ingrown toenails back then, and I used to have to dig them out myself because we didn't see doctors or nurses. They didn't come around. I think it was like a monthly visit or something like that, maybe longer. Like I would put my name on a request to go see a doctor, and I wouldn't see a doctor for weeks or months after that. So I was walking around, and back then they had road gangs, meaning that I would have to work on a road gang. We would work on the side of the road in Virginia, which I liked because it was so pretty there. It was a Shenandoah Valley. You know anything about the Shenandoah Valley, you know how beautiful it is there. But I would be on the road gangs, but my ingrown toenails would be so bad. They would be infected, the smell. It was so disgusting, and I was so hurt over it because I couldn't take care of myself in the right way. I had to dig them out myself. And it would be so painful. But the only relief I would get is I would get it out myself. Somehow I would get it out, and, you know, eventually, you know, the infection would get so bad that they would finally have to send me to a doctor. So this one particular time, and this is how bad it is, and this is how they do you, and this is how they treat you. I couldn't walk. I couldn't even put my foot in the boot because it was so my foot was so bad and the smell was so bad or whatever. I would always have to constantly clean it and to keep it from stinking. My socks I would always have to get new socks. Fortunately, I was making money again off a store box there, so I would always have new stuff. But they finally got me to a doctor, and I remember they taking me into the infirmary. And it was quiet. It was like old school, all these old limestone walls, and the smell was really antiseptic or whatever. I remember the smell even to this day. Like sometimes if I smell betadine or whatever, it reminds me of that. But I remember sitting on the bed, and he looking at my feet, and it was infected, and it was really messed up. My big toe on my right foot. And he said, "I'm going to take this out for you." And he had this big lobster claw, like tooth thing. It was like a instrument. It was like lobster claw, and it was angled so it could get into the toe. And I'm like, "Then you gonna use that?" And then he was like, "Yeah." I was like, you know, "Can I get some pain med? You gonna give me any pain medicine or whatever?" He was like, "No, we don't have any pain medicine." So guess what they gave me? He gave me a towel. He gave me a washcloth, and he told me to bite down on the washcloth as he pulled the thing out. He asked me, was I ready? I was like, all right, and I had the washcloth in my mouth. And I'll never forget it because it was so fucking painful. He took that thing and he pulled my toe back with another instrument. He dug in and he pulled it out, and I started screaming into that towel. And I'll never forget it because tears started running down my eyes from the physical pain. And he just digging and digging. And he finally ripped it out. And I'm crying with the screaming into the towel. Screaming. No pain, man. No nothing. No compassion. No, you got this. No pausing or anything. I just had to take it. And I remember he pulled it out and I felt it pop out. And he pulled it, he showed it to me, and the nail was dug up and it was digging up. You could see why I was infected or whatever. And he cleaned me up and he wrapped it up. And he gave me the kindest thing he did for me that day was he gave me a few minutes to get myself together so I wouldn't go out there crying and they would see me crying. They didn't care for us. They didn't care about healing us emotionally and spiritually. They were there to break us. I can't really get into the cruel things that I've seen because it would take too long. I'm already at 52 minutes and I just really want to wind this thing up. But it was so much cruelty there, not just from the inmates. The inmates weren't the biggest threat. It was just the system itself. They didn't tell me that I was going for parole. I didn't even know that I was up for parole. They just called me one day, and then fast forward, I remember getting a letter to say that I was paroled and how happy I was, and then how people would pick on me because they wanted to run your time up. That's what it's called. When they found out that you had parole, they tell you to keep your parole secret. But of course, I'm young, I'm emotional, I'm happy that I'm finally getting ready to go home. And it still took me months to go home after I got paroled. And they tried to run my time up. They would pick on me. This one guy from New York. And I remember Bailey grabbing me because I was about to fuck him up because he did something. He ran over my foot with a broom, which is a violation inside. You don't brush people. You don't touch people with anything. And I jumped to go get him, and Bailey jumped in me. He said, "Don't you so stupid. You can't tell he trying to run your time up because if you get a new charge, you get assault charge or whatever, they'll give you a charge for outside and that'll keep you in. That'll revoke your parole or whatever." But there's so many things that I could tell you guys, and it's not enough time in these podcasts to really tell you. So in the course of future podcasts, I'll tell you guys more things or more details of what went on inside. But a lot of the things that bothered me or traumatized me was just the system itself. And one story I'm gonna tell you real quick before I let you guys go is I believe in being an impactful person. And even back then when I didn't know who I was lost. I was lost inside the dark because I had chose the dark. I told you guys that I wanted to be cool. I didn't want to be kind. So I had chose the light. And I told you guys that after this podcast, in future podcasts, I'm going to tell you what happened on the streets of Philly. I'm going to tell you what happened in my life inside healthcare and outside of healthcare, because they're all intertwined, and all the stories, they're linked, and they all mattered, and they all led me to who I am today. But during my time upstate, I would read a lot. I always tell you guys that I would read a lot. It's my passion. To this day, I still read. I love it so much. It brings me so much joy, even today. But back then, I'm grateful for my mom and my parents for teaching us and sending us to school. And I always got good grades. They gave us the best school. And I also always tell you, my mother and them, they did so much right by me. And I hurt them so much by my activity. And I live my life now to honor them and give them something to be proud of. So when I go onto the other side, I see my mom and I see Joyce, they'll hug me and they'll say that, well, I did a job well done. That's why I'm so kind-hearted. I just embrace who I really am, a kind-hearted individual. But anyway, I was reading. And again, somebody came up to me and he asked me, he said, Gucci, why do you read so much? Same thing that happened in county. And I said, because it sets me free. I love to read because it makes me feel free. And this guy, he said that he wished he could be free too. And I'll never forget it, because I said, I said to him, you can be free. Just go read. I said, read, get a book and read. And he looked at me with the saddest eyes ever. And the hurt in his eyes really resonated with me, because again, I'm an empath, and even back then I was an empath because I could read people. So and it hurt me, and I realized. And he said the words that would really set me off. He said, I don't know how to read. And I said, that's okay. Come with me every day and sit down, and I'll read to you, and we'll be free together. And he did. And every day I would read to people. And before I knew it was a big group. Not a big group, but it was a nice group. And my legend grew. I was well known. I was known as a kind-hearted person, a person with a store box. I gave away, I read, did a lot of things on the inside that would lead me out of the darkness one day. Kindness is cool, man. So going forward, as I was reading, and when I got paroled, the guy came up to me, he said, I'm going to learn how to read, so when you're gone, I'll know how to read. And I can still be free. That's a true story. I'm paraphrasing here and there, but it's a true story. So guys, I'm going to leave you guys with that. Thank you for stopping in and listening to my stories. And I hope that it impacts somebody in a positive way. Know that your mistakes don't define you. Your whole story defines you. The moments matter, the stories matter, the links matter. But overall, you have to look at yourself and say that you did well. That if you survived certain things and it didn't let it destroy you and make you a mean, nasty person, that you did well. And to the people that it did alter and make it mean and nasty and hateful, know that you have another opportunity right now to change. If you plant good seeds and you water those seeds and you do the right things, you'll eventually grow a tree to be proud of. I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of how I move. I'm proud of how I treat people. I'm proud of my store, Sheila's House of Style. I'm proud of the Savvy Surgical Technology. I'm proud of Rebirth Loan. I'm proud of who I am. I'm proud of being kind-hearted. When I see people sad or hurt, I always sometimes make an excuse and say, I'm going to give somebody something. And I want you to go and share my store. But sometimes it's really because I think that person need me to be nice to them, because I see their pain. So I make up a reason to be nice to them. I say, hey, just share my store with 10 people or something like that. But in reality, I just wanted to be nice to her or him. Not just females. I give stuff to males, females. I try to be good to people. And that's what defines you. My time in the penitentiary didn't define me. It altered me. It hurt me. It hurt me because I hurt my mother. And, I was told stories later on how they would hear her crying every night because I was gone. I didn't know that. Team, the stories matter. The links, they matter. If you want better links, you have to create better stories. You want better stories, you have to do better deeds. Leave the selfishness alone. The only time you should be selfish is when it makes you better. And I'm going to leave you guys with this. What you do to yourself doesn't make you a good or bad person. You have a right to do whatever you want to yourself. It's your life. What you do to other people is what makes you a good or bad person. Throughout my life, whether in the penitentiary or in the underbelly of Philadelphia, or when I was traveling in New Haven and Boston, wherever I found myself, I was always a kind-hearted person, even when I was doing bad things. So that's the end of season 1, The Savvy Surgical Technologist, State Property. Again, I hope you guys got something out of it. I hope you guys go forward, and I hope you always keep it savvy. Season 2 will be back in a couple of weeks. I have more guests on. We'll talk about what's going on in and outside of healthcare. Like I always say to you guys, the stories matter. You matter. Thanks. Take care. And keep it savvy.